Next, we will talk about holistic review and class composition. While grades and scores matter, admissions are still holistic. So, what does this mean? Institutional priorities. Universities build a class to fulfill various goals: geographic and socioeconomic diversity, legacy balance, recruiting athletes, first generation representation, etc. For example, in Harvard's announced class of 2026, 20.5% were Pell eligible, in other words, low income, and 20.3% were first generation students. Colleges won't tell applicants how much each factor matters. This is always going to be undisclosed. This is the idea of quotas, but it does mean two equally qualified students might have different outcomes depending on these contexts. In other words, they're looking at the full context of a student's background. Demonstrated interest. Some schools track whether a student visited campus, attended a virtual info session, or corresponded with admissions. Private universities often use this as a tiebreaker, whereas Ivies officially say they don't track it. The insider note here is going to be that demonstrated interest, which is what this topic is called, can sometimes make a subtle difference at certain private colleges when deciding among equally strong candidates. It never hurts to show genuine enthusiasm, for example, by writing a thoughtful Why X University essay or attending an admitted student online event where you can ask questions and learn a little bit more about the school. Essays and recommendations. With so many stellar applications, colleges listen closely to voice and character in essays and recommendation letters. They look for authenticity, self-reflection, and what makes the student unique. This is the key concept here: uniqueness. Last year's admissions officers repeatedly said they love reading about growth and insight rather than I just volunteered at a soup kitchen and it was great. A secret to stand out: tell a personal story that only you could tell, even if it's on a humble topic, and connect it to how you'll contribute to that university. Many advisors note that first drafts often read like college brochure statements. The final drafts that shine feel reflective and specific. Extracurricular depth over breadth. Elite colleges prize depth and leadership. Having 10 clubs is less important than having a four-year leadership role or creative initiative in one or two activities. So when we have the leadership program. So it provides students with firsthand leadership experience, because leadership is an important and rare skill. It's harder to be a leader than it is to be a follower. So organizing resources, organizing people is a very important skill, especially for today's changing world. Admissions officers can tell if an activity was just a resume filler. Admissions committees love seeing genuine passion and growth. One Stanford advisor told parents in an interview, true interest, like a multi-year science research project or starting a community program, signals motivation more than a dozen minor roles. So quality over quantity. Current events impact. Policies and trends, for instance, the Supreme Court decisions on race-conscious admissions, state bans on legacy consideration, etc., do influence tactics. For example, Harvard recently noted a slight uptick in admitted Asian American students, 27.8% for the class of 2026, amid ongoing legal scrutiny of admissions. Colleges are also pushing to admit more first-generation or Pell students through expanded outreach. Expect universities to continue to refine their diversity and inclusion strategies, sometimes publicly as in Harvard and Stanford statements, and sometimes quietly. Lastly, I wanted to focus on insider secrets. and what's less known. Admissions isn't a strict formula. There is no magic points chart. Even well-informed counselors can't predict outcomes with certainty. An often heard insider quip: admissions is unpredictable. Even valedictorians get rejected from colleges they could have likely handled. This is partly because each applicant is one piece of a complex class puzzle. So you need to understand that context. Legacy and athletic preferences. So this is for my student athletes and legacy students. Although not publicly quantified, it's well known that legacy applicants and recruited athletes have much higher admit rates. After the Supreme Court eliminated race as a factor, many private universities still consider legacy and athletic status. Current trends suggest most Ivies are still admitting some legacies and athletes by tradition. For example, Dartmouth admits legacies at about double the general rate. But exact statistics and other information are rarely released. What's harder to find? New moves on this. One insider rumor: some colleges are quietly limiting legacies to avoid controversy, but details are scarce. In other words, despite the policies, it is still going on to a much lesser extent, however. Geographic targeting. Schools are setting rough goals for class diversity by region and school type. For instance, if a state already has many admits, applicants from other places may face steeper odds. Top colleges routinely say that admits from all 50 states and dozens of countries. While they won't reveal quotas, which we talked about before, some insight from common data set or press releases show admitted breakdowns. So here's the pro tip. If you're applying from a hotbed like the Northeast for many Ivies, make sure your application stands out in other ways, activities, essays, etc., because competition will be especially fierce. So there is a regional context now that you need to take into account when you apply. So I've heard of some students changing regions simply because it will be easier for them to stand out. The concept there is that they're going to a smaller pond, so it's easier for them to be chosen, to be selected. Application details. Each college has quirks. For example, Stanford's moved to ban legacy preferences due to California law, but most Ivy institutions in other states still consider it. Some top schools also look at demonstrated interest. For instance, Michigan tracks visits, MIT and Stanford say they don't. These nuances are hard to research without inside context. Working well with experienced counselors or attending official admitted student events can give clues to such hidden factors. And lastly, for final insights, despite all these details, remember that top colleges value authenticity. The strongest applications in this competitive era are those who clearly demonstrate passion and fit. Those are two super important concepts. A polished, genuine voice in essays and interviews, many of those being optional, but they are recommended. Is the student going to engage with our campus community and make a difference? Can sometimes tip scales. Also keep perspective. Even perfect applicants get denied. The best strategy is to build a well-rounded profile, rigorous academics, meaningful activities, and clear interests. Apply smartly. Early action, for instance, if you have a clear first choice. And keep a broad college list that includes targets and safeties. So with this, we conclude the presentation. But what I wanted to say is that you need to understand the full context of admissions trends in anticipation of application season to make sure that you position yourself well and increase your chances of getting accepted into these competitive colleges. Thank you.
感谢 Mr. Pierre 今天和我们的分享。你有任何的问题都可以直接来咨询文美集团。 美国文美集团美国大学申请规划服务第一品牌，20年经验，万博士领衔常春藤顾问团队，中美双顾问模式服务1个学生，按照大学录取学校排名收费，与孩子形成利益共同体。华人老品牌，值得您的信赖。文美集团隆重推出 ACAP 大学专业及职业测评规划管理系统，华人升学机构首创，完美解决华人学生最大升学痛点。人工智能提前锁定大学专业方向，提前2到5年布局申请。有了专业测评系统，孩子的课程规划更清晰，活动更聚焦，文书更有故事感，大学申请更有竞争力。5到11年级学生都可以报名参加测评。文美集团1对1非营利组织成立运营领导力项目，让孩子从参与者变为领导者，真正成长、成人、成才进名校。5到11年级学生均可报名参加。文美集团社会影响力联合国网络义工课程，节省孩子时间，做名校认可的社会影响力，高大上义工。5到11年级学生均可报名参加。感谢大家的收看，我们下次再见。